Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we continue following the story of Hoai Ca and Hùng, a story that is not only about debt, but also about long, heavy days filled with responsibility, family bonds, and choices no one ever wants to face. Join us in today's video to better understand what comes next, as everything begins to move into a phase that is even more suffocating and hopeless than before. In the previous episode, the story closed in an atmosphere of tension and heaviness. Hùng was forced to confront a truth he was never prepared to accept. His mother had once borrowed 50 million dying from loan sharks. At first, it was meant to solve an immediate difficulty, but interest piled upon interest. Time showed no mercy, and that amount quietly grew beyond control. By the time Hùng learned the whole truth, the debt was no longer 50 million. It had risen to more than 100 million, a number large enough to leave anyone stunned. What hurt Hùng the most was that while this debt had never even existed in his mind, he himself was still struggling with an old debt his mother had left behind from years ago. After countless efforts, months of saving every penny, working non-stop, Hùng had only just begun to see a faint light of stability. His small family with Hoai Ca had only recently enjoyed a brief period of peace, just when life seemed to be getting back on track, and then the storm hit again, sudden, violent, and leaving no one time to prepare. As this episode begins, the burden is no longer just a vague worry or lifeless numbers on paper. It crashes directly onto Hùng shoulders the moment he steps forward to take responsibility for his mother. It is not a carefully calculated decision, nor something he truly wants to do, but Hùng understands one thing clearly: if he does not step in, no one else can bear the consequences. His mother is old, exhausted after a chain of long-standing mistakes, and Hùng cannot bring himself to turn away as she is pushed to the brink. From that moment on, Hùng no longer allows himself to breathe easily. Every thought in his mind revolves around one thing: money. The longer it drags on, the more the interest grows. Numbers that seem still on paper quietly multiply day by day, hour by hour, feeding his endless anxiety. Hùng knows the rules of the loan sharks all too well. The more you delay, the higher the price, paid not only in money, but in the safety of the entire family. The days that follow pass in a state of constant tension. Hùng loses his appetite, his sleep. By day, he tries to act normal, tries to get through work, tries to keep everything from collapsing in front of Hoai Ca. But when night falls, when the house sinks into silence, when the steady breathing of everyone else fills the darkness, Hùng sits alone. He stares into the empty space ahead, nothing but thick darkness, and wonders where he should even begin to raise such a sum of money. At this moment, Hùng is carrying two debts on his shoulders. The old one is still there, not yet resolved, and before it can even be closed, a new one crashes down, heavier, more dangerous. The calculations in his head repeat over and over, yet they all lead to the same conclusion: a dead end. The road ahead is frighteningly unclear, with no obvious turn, no safe solution, only the feeling of being cornered, pushed closer and closer to the edge, without knowing when there will be no way back. In the silence of the night, worry is no longer something that can be brushed aside with reason. It seeps in, creeping through every thought and every breath, making Hùng feel as though the entire world is placing its weight on shoulders already worn down by exhaustion. And it is from this very moment that the days ahead for Hùng and Hoai Ca begin to enter an even longer and harsher series of trials, where every decision comes with a price that is far from small. Hoai Ca sensed something was wrong very early on, earlier than Hùng ever thought he had managed to hide it. Without anyone saying a word, through the smallest changes in their daily routines, she could already feel that something heavy was silently weighing on the man in front of her. Hung had grown noticeably quieter. The casual conversations they once shared became fewer, replaced by long stretches of silence. His eyes no longer carried the ease they once did. Instead, they were always distant and thoughtful, as if chasing after worries he himself could not yet find a way out of. What worried Hoai Ca the most was Hung's reaction whenever his phone rang. Even the slightest vibration on the table made him flinch instinctively. There were calls he refused to answer, letting the phone ring until it stopped, but just a glance at the screen was enough to drain the color from his face. What followed was a heavy silence, a barely audible sigh, an awkward attempt to appear normal that could not hide the tension rising in every movement. Hoai Ca did not ask right away, but those small details kept piling up in her heart, making her unease grow clearer with each passing day. That quiet worry followed Hoai Ca for many days. She could neither ignore it nor pretend that everything was fine. She understood Hung, understood his nature. The bigger the problem, the more he kept it to himself, the less he wanted to pull others into the mess. But precisely because she understood this, she could not allow him to face it alone. She waited for the right moment, when everything was quiet enough, when there were no interruptions to break the conversation. One evening, after the children had fallen sound asleep, the house sank into its familiar stillness. Soft yellow light filled the room, not too bright, not too dim. Hung sat there, his posture weary, shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible burden. Hoai Ca watched him for a long moment before speaking gently. Her voice was slow and calm, without blame or pressure, just an opening, enough for Hung to know that she had seen everything. She said that if it truly came to it, she could sell the house they were living in. It was the home where she and the children stayed, the place she cared for and built up day by day, but if selling it could keep the family safe, she was willing to consider it. Hoai Ca did not speak with the tone of sacrifice, nor did she seek gratitude. She simply presented it as a possibility, one path that could be considered in a moment of deadlock. Then she mentioned the old piece of land. Back in the days when they were still in love, during those simple yet hopeful times, Hung had bought it with everything he had. It was not just a plot of land, but a memory, a marker of the most beautiful period of their lives. Now, that land was being used by relatives, nearly forgotten amid the busyness of the present. Hoai Ca said that if necessary, they could also think about selling it as a way of closing a chapter of the past in order to survive the present. The moment he heard that, Hung shook his head almost instinctively. The movement was firm, without hesitation, as if he had prepared that answer long ago. He could not accept selling their current home. To Hung, it was not just a place to live, but the last refuge for Hoai Ca and the children. If it were sold, they would have no stable shelter, forced to start over from nothing while the storm showed no sign of stopping. That thought made him feel even more uneasy than the debt hanging over his head. As for the land tied to their memories, Hung did not want to speak of it in terms of buying and selling either. In reality, even if it were sold, it would not bring much money, certainly not enough to solve the root of the problem. But to him, its value had never been about money. It was one of the few things left that was connected to a time when the two of them believed that having each other was enough. Selling that land to Hung would feel like erasing a part of his memories with his own hands, especially now, when so many things in the present already felt as though they were falling apart. Hung's refusal carried no harshness, but it was firm enough for Hoai Ca to understand that there were boundaries he was not willing to cross. Under the dim light, the two of them sat there, surrounded by thoughts they had not yet put into words. The house remained quiet, but beneath that calm lay worries with no clear way out, difficult choices still hanging in the air, waiting for a decision that neither of them was yet certain they were ready to face. After a long stretch of silence, When the thoughts in his mind had collided until he felt utterly drained, Hung finally spoke. His voice lowered, no longer carrying the earlier hesitation, as if he had weighed this option very carefully before saying it out loud. Hung proposed another solution: selling his mother's house. It was the home she had lived in for many years, the place tied to nearly the entirety of their lives together. If it were sold, his mother could move in with Hoai Ca and the children, or he would try to buy her a small piece of land nearby so she wouldn't have to live too far away and could still be cared for easily. The money from selling the house, at the very least, could settle the debt pressing down on them right now and temporarily ease the situation. As Hung said this, his gaze did not avoid hers, yet the heaviness in his eyes was impossible to hide. He knew exactly what he was talking about. This was not simply a matter of selling property, but a decision that directly affected his mother and the place she had clung to for so many years. But in these circumstances, Hung felt he had very few options left. Between letting the debt continue to grow and being forced to sacrifice something truly significant, he found himself pushed toward the most painful choice. However, Hoai Ca shook her head as soon as Hung finished speaking. Her reaction was not rushed, but it was clear and firm. She understood all too well what that house meant to Hung and his mother. It represented a lifetime of effort, of saving every single coin. From the early days of building it amid hardship, to the times when it had to be mortgaged during difficult periods, and then the long struggle to earn enough to reclaim it. That house was not just a place to live, it was proof of endurance, of the many hardships mother and son had overcome together. In Hoai Ca's mind, selling that house just to repay a little over 100 million was far too costly, far too heartbreaking. She could not accept trading away such a profound emotional legacy to settle a debt that, while large, was not entirely without other possibilities. She looked at Hung, speaking not with harsh opposition, but with genuine concern. Hoai Ca knew that if the house were sold, the sense of guilt and regret would follow Hung for a very long time, perhaps weighing on him even more heavily than the debt itself. After thinking it over again, Hoai Ca returned to her original idea. She said that selling her own piece of land was still the more reasonable option. It was an asset in her name, something she had the right to decide without hurting anyone else further. She knew that the land also held memories and was part of her life, but compared to his mother's house, she felt she could accept that sacrifice more easily. She said that even if they had to rent a place, even if they had to endure hardship for a while, she could bear it. As long as the family was not pushed into danger, as long as Hung did not have to carry an even heavier sense of guilt toward his mother, she was willing to choose that difficult path. Hoai Ca's words carried no complaint, no sense of coercion. She spoke calmly, as if she had already prepared herself for this possibility. Yet it was precisely that calmness that stirred Hung's emotions. He looked at her, his heart filled with both pain and gratitude. Pain, because the woman before him always thought of others before herself. Gratitude, because in his most desperate moment, she was still willing to stand by him without calculating gain or loss. Hung reached for Hoai Ca's hand. Her hand was still warm, yet in that moment, it felt strangely fragile to him. He did not say much, nor did he make grand promises. Just one short sentence, carrying the full weight of everything he was holding inside. "Don't worry. I'll find a way. If there truly is no other option left, then we'll talk about it again." That sentence was not an empty reassurance, but a boundary Hung set for himself. He did not want Hoai Ca to sacrifice any more while he still had the strength to shoulder the burden. He wanted to preserve a place of support for her and the children, even if it was fragile, even if it was temporary, at least it would still exist. Yet deep in his heart, Hung understood one thing he did not say out loud. Time was not waiting for him. With each passing day, the debt continued to grow quietly, like a shadow stretching out behind his back. The difficult choices had not disappeared. They had only been pushed back for the moment. And while Hoai Ca still believed that there would be a way, Hùng knew he was standing in a race against time, one he was not certain he could win. After Hùng officially stepped in to take on the debt, everything quickly changed in a way he had never wanted. The lenders no longer maintained their silence or pretended patience. In a very short time, their true nature was exposed, cold, blunt, and merciless. Hung's phone began ringing non-stop, day and night, regardless of the hour. Sometimes, less than 10 minutes after he had hung up, the phone would ring again, urgent, relentless, as if deliberately denying him even a moment to breathe. The tone on the other end of the line no longer bothered to hide anything. There were no more roundabout words or feigned politeness. Every call carried clear pressure, veiled threats that made Hung's heart tighten the moment he heard the ringtone. At times, he didn't answer right away, but just seeing the incoming number was enough to drain the color from his face. The curt words, the deliberate silences on the other end of the line, all of it created a crushing pressure, as if a rope were slowly tightening around his neck. It didn't stop at threats over the phone. The lenders began using methods that made their presence unmistakably clear. A few of them started appearing around the area where Hùng worked. They didn't cause a scene or approach him directly. They simply stood at a distance, leaning against their vehicles, smoking, their eyes quietly fixed on him. Yet that very silence was what made it so chilling. They wanted Hùng to see them, a wordless reminder that they knew where he was, what he was doing, and that they could show up anytime they wanted. Every time Hùng left work, stepping out of the company gate, a heavy weight settled on his chest. He didn't dare turn around too often, yet he could still sense the eyes following him. The feeling of being watched made every step feel heavier than the last. He knew it wasn't a coincidence, it was deliberate pressure. They didn't need to say much, just appearing in the right place at the right time was enough to rob him of sleep and peace. What worried Hùng even more was when the situation no longer stayed confined to him alone. One time, they came near Hoai Ca's house. They didn't barge in or make noise. They simply stood at the entrance of the alley, asking a few casual questions, their tone half probing, half warning. But for Hoai Ca, that was more than enough to terrify her. She had never faced looks like those before, cold, scrutinizing, and filled with unspoken menace. They didn't say anything outright. They didn't directly mention the debt. Yet every question, every glance carried an unmistakable threat. Their attitude made Hoai Ca realize this was no longer something that could be taken lightly. She stood there, her heart pounding, trying to remain calm while her mind spiraled in chaos. Just the thought that these people knew where she lived, knew about her children, sent a chill down her spine. When Hoai Ca told Hùng what had happened, he fell silent. A fierce wave of guilt surged through him. He could endure pressure. He could accept being threatened. But dragging Hoai Ca and the children into this nightmare was something he could not accept. The image of strangers lingering near his home, the insinuating questions, replayed over and over in his mind, leaving him unable to feel at ease even for a second. Hùng began to realize that he was standing at a true crossroads in his life. On one side was the safety of his family, something he was willing to trade everything to protect. On the other were the few remaining assets he had, tied to countless memories, years of scrimping and saving, tears and fragile hopes. No choice was easy, and no path came without pain. He tried to think of every possible way to raise the money quickly. But the more he thought, the more trapped he felt. Time was too tight, the amount far too large for him to manage. Every option that surfaced in his mind came with a corresponding loss. Sell this and lose a foundation. hold on to it, and risk disaster crashing down on his family. Each choice carried a heavy price, and every one of them weighed on his heart. There were moments when Hùng sat alone, his mind completely blank, no longer having the strength to calculate or plan. The pressure from the constant calls, the silent surveillance, the fear for Hoài Ca and the children, it all piled up, pushing him hard against a wall with nowhere left to retreat. He knew he didn't have much time to hesitate, yet he also knew he wasn't calm enough to make a decision without sacrificing a very large part of his life in return. Will Hùng ultimately agree to sell Hoài Ca's house to deal with the immediate crisis? Or will he find another way before everything spirals beyond control? Stay tuned for the next episode to see where Hùng decision will lead his family.
Đó, cái mắt của mình nó lại bị giống như là nó bị viêm răng mạc các bạn ạ. Mình hay ngứa quá, xong mình hay dại nó bị đỏ. Lại dại nữa, xong lại ngứa lại đỏ. Trời ơi, xương mình ngứa mát quá. Cảm ơn mọi người đã theo dõi video của mình nhé. Tạm biệt mọi người nhé.